It is 9:30 and the Riksdag will reconvene. Items 1 and 2. Statement of government policy and ministers to be appointed. Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson of the Social Democratic Party has the floor.
Herr talman.
Mr. Speaker, honourable members of the Riksdag. One person, one vote. Everyone's equal right to participate and steer the society we live in. It is society's most fundamental expression of the equal value of all people. Today, this year, marks the 100th anniversary of the recognition of this right. In 1921, for the first time in Sweden, women and men alike were able to exercise universal and equal suffrage in elections to the Swedish Parliament, the Riksdag. This right cannot be taken for granted once and for all. It must be reinforced and won over and over again by each successive generation. And in 10 months, we will once again celebrate democracy as the Swedish people go to the polls. Let us together impress upon yet another generation of voters of the importance of using their democratic voice. All public power in Sweden proceeds from the people. Swedish democracy is founded on the free formation of opinion and on universal and equal suffrage. Public power shall be exercised with respect for the equal worth of all and the liberty and dignity of the individual. It is written thus in our country's constitution. And we must continue to stand on this same bedrock of democracy in Sweden for the next 100 years.
Herr talman.
Mr. Speaker, government policy in the coming years will be distinguished by vigorous action to counter 3 serious societal problems. Firstly, leaving no stone unturned to reduce segregation and combat the ruthless criminality that currently threatens all of society. Secondly, driving the green industrial revolution through investments throughout the country. In this way, emissions will be reduced and the jobs of the future will be created in Sweden. And thirdly, taking back control of the welfare system so that everyone who works in it is provided with the decent and fair conditions needed to do their job. In this way, we can ensure high quality in schools, healthcare and social care and care services throughout the country. And out of respect for everyone who works and who has built up our country, we must also provide secure social insurance and pensions. Sweden will move forward step by step, reform by reform, because Sweden can do better.
Och herr talman.
Mr. Speaker, as of November this year, 290 shootings have taken place in our country. They've cost 42 people their lives. Many of them were young boys, children. Shootings in gang conflicts are not isolated cases. They are organized and they are rooted in a society where the gaps and differences between living conditions are too wide. Economic, linguistic and normative gaps. This serious violence threatens to poison all of society and our cohesion, and it undermines trust between people and weakens confidence in the future. It turns people in this country into crime victims, casualties and mourners. And there are residential areas in Sweden that are characterized by overcrowding and a housing black market, where organised crime operates as landlord, bank and employer, where the law enforcement system is closed out and the gangs create their own rules, where children are recruited directly into criminal lifestyles in which bombings and shootings are everyday occurrences. This cannot continue. Swedish society must be stronger than that. And to stop the violence, the perpetrators must be prosecuted. Criminal policy will be overhauled. More severe penalties have been imposed for more than 70 offences, and some 30 acts that previously were not punishable have been criminalised. A historic expansion of the entire Swedish judicial system is underway. We're well on our way to meeting our target of 10,000 more police employees, and a comprehensive expansion of the Swedish prison and probation service is underway, and the capacity of the courts is being significantly reinforced. Essentially, every law enforcement agency has been given new tools, more employees, and greater authority. Now, we're going even further. Even more severe penalties will be imposed for gang-related offences, and the possibility of using secret coercive measures to prevent serious crime is being investigated. There will be tougher penalties for perjury, obstructing the course of justice and protecting a criminal. It should not be possible to threaten witnesses into silence. Instead, they should receive the support they need to safely fulfil their duty. It will be easier to detain people who are suspected of serious offences. At present, the presumption of detention applies to those suspected of offences with a minimum penalty of 2 years imprisonment. This will be reduced to 1 year and 6 months imprisonment. And anyone who commits multiple offences should be punished more severely. Reduced sentences for young people aged 18 to 20 who commit serious offences will be abolished, and penalties should better reflect the severity of offences, even when it comes to perpetrators who are young. The Act regarding special provisions for the care of young persons is under review, and society must act more resolutely towards young people at risk, and more measures should be possible even without parental consent. More gang members and young people at risk must be taken into care and benefit from social measures. And a national youth crime board system similar to the Danish model will be investigated. Violent crime and the power exercised by criminal elements are a threat to the public support and democratic legitimacy upon which our legal order is based. They must be fought with the full force of our democratic society.
Herr talman!
Mr. Speaker, every year, around 15 women are murdered by their former or current intimate partner. The government has ensured permanent funds and grants to prevent men's violence against women and to protect the victims. Possibilities to also strengthen the protection against psychological violence provided under criminal law are being investigated, and there will be more severe penalties for violence and other forms of abuse in intimate relationships. 20 years ago, a year before she was murdered, Fadime Saindal stood here in the Riksdag and said, "Regardless of your cultural background, it should be a given for every young woman that you can have both your family and the life you want for yourself." And she concluded by urging us all to see all of the young girls who are denied that right in the name of honour. And she said, "I hope that you won't turn your backs on them." Support in the Swedish Riksdag is broad, and the government's direction is clear. Honour-based oppression has no place in our country. All forms of equality and gender equality apply equally to all. Honour-based oppression must stop.
Herr talman!
Mr. Speaker, more severe penalties have had an effect. More hardened criminals are now serving sentences. But much broader efforts are needed to break the segregation that leads to poverty and hopelessness and fuels gang crime. Every minister in the government that takes office today will be tasked within their area of responsibility and with the support of the relevant government agencies with leaving no stone unturned in bringing an end to gang crime and to combat segregation. The government will gather representatives from the municipalities where the violence is worst and segregation the most pronounced to work together to combat criminality. Many parents, teachers, social workers, local police, sports associations, and committed volunteers today stand in opposition to these criminals, spreading hope in the darkness. But many more need to get involved. We must all pull together. And for this reason, I also want to turn to everyone in Sweden. Every single one. No one individual can break segregation or stop the shootings or the gangs of their own, but everyone can do something. So where nighttime volunteers go out in the streets or other similar activities are organised, get involved if you can. Help out in local sports associations so that there are recreational activities for our children and young people. Stay and talk for a few extra minutes with someone who needs to improve their Swedish to feel that they belong in our society. And I would like to urge Sweden's employers, before bringing in low-skilled workers from other countries, remember that there are many long-term unemployed in Sweden who want nothing more than to provide for themselves. Because when all of society mobilizes, then we together can build back Sweden's security.
Herr talman.
Mr. Speaker, there is nothing more fundamental than having a job to go to. Nothing is so essential to becoming part of society. And those who are out of work must meet clear expectations, therefore, but also many and good opportunities to find work. And if you are young and you've come to Sweden at an early age, you must complete an upper secondary education and move on to working life or higher education. And if you already have professional skills that are in demand, you must learn Swedish as quickly as possible and take one of the available jobs. If you're a little older and lack the right skills, you can start with subsidized employment, helping out in our society with work that otherwise does not get done. With this labour policy strategy, the government has contributed to creating 250,000 new jobs and halved the integration time for new arrivals. And despite the pandemic and the worst economic downturn since the Second World War, a larger proportion of people born abroad are working today than in 2014. Sweden makes clear demands, but also offers opportunities. This works. And we will continue with this approach. Everyone who can work should work. And of course, having a job and your own income, you also get the freedom to decide for yourself how you want to live your life and with whom. This applies equally to all, regardless of where you come from and regardless of your gender.
Och integrationen ska förbättras.
Integration must be improved based on sound knowledge. Inquiries will be appointed on clearer activity requirements of a certain number of hours per week for those receiving social assistance, on placing demands on those receiving a permanent residence permit with regard to language skills and knowledge of Sweden, on the possibility of establishing state-run reception centres where asylum seekers will live and take part in an introduction to Swedish society during their initial period in Sweden, and the quality of Swedish for immigrants education will be improved. The Swedish Schools Inspectorate will inspect program providers, and more adults will be able to combine vocational education and training with Swedish language courses so as to find a job more quickly. New start job opportunities will be expanded and labour market entry agreements introduced. Labour law will be reformed in accordance with the agreement concluded by the social partners. Sweden's entrepreneurs create jobs and contribute to our country's prosperity. It should be easy to start and run a business in Sweden. And it should also be easy to get an education or training program. The Adult Education Initiative is creating thousands of paths that lead to work throughout the country. And now higher vocational education, regional vocational adult education and folk high schools are now being expanded to provide additional education and training places. Healthcare training programs provided both at higher education institutions and remotely is also being expanded, and healthcare will have better conditions to create the practice-based places that these programs require. Sweden has one of the most comprehensive student finance systems in the world. A rapidly changing labour market requires the acquisition of new skills, of course. And now Sweden will have one of the world's best career transition assistance schemes. And with the implementation of the Social Partners Agreement, our competitiveness will be strengthened and workers will be given security in this transition.
Mr. Speaker, we have kept 1.5 alive, with the degrees alive, but with the pulse of it, 1.5 is very weak. This was how Alok Sharma, president of COP26, summarised the results from Glasgow. And the clock is ticking. If the world cannot tackle the climate crisis, the consequences will be colossal. Ambitions must be raised. The pulse must quicken. The world must succeed. And with its green welfare state, Sweden chose to take the lead. International confidence in us increases. Sweden's innovations and solutions are exported around the world. And a global climate race is underway. And Sweden is in the leading pack. The Green Industry Leap and the Climate Leap set the course and will be developed. More than 300,000 new homes have been built since 2014, and sustainable construction is being promoted. And as Sweden now invests its way out of recession following the pandemic, it is through a robust green restart of the Swedish economy. Right now, throughout the country, a green industrial revolution is underway throughout our country. Fossil-free steel production, battery factories, electric heavy goods vehicles. This is reducing emissions and creating tens of thousands of new jobs throughout the country. The pace will now be stepped up further. But there is that the risks of necessary investments will not happen because the markets consider them too risky. Swedish industry must be able to phase out fossil fuels. Green state credit guarantees will be expanded to 50 billion kronor next year. Sweden today has an innovative and competitive business sector and skilled workers who are ready to adapt to the new jobs that are emerging. The government therefore proposes a new government-financed skills initiative for the climate transition. A new national electrification strategy will identify how the capacity of our electricity networks can be rapidly expanded and electricity production from clean, renewable and cheap energy sources can increase. Efforts to expand offshore wind power are an important part of this. There must be good conditions for living and working throughout the country. The level of ambition in regional policy will be raised. Major investments in competitive and environmentally sustainable agriculture will be made Within the framework of the Rural Development Programme, investments in broadband are increasing substantially. Clear coverage demands are being made of operators, and special operational subsidies for grocery shops will be made permanent. Shore protection measures will be more differentiated. It will be easier to build in rural areas at the same time as shore protection will be strengthened in highly exploited areas. Areas of special significance for animal and plant life will be preserved, and forest ownership rights will be strengthened. This will lay the foundations for harnessing the forest's economic, climate and environmental potential to a greater extent. A new national plan for infrastructure will be presented in the new year. New steps are being taken toward a modern, fossil-free transport infrastructure so that people can transport both themselves and the goods that are produced in our country. Next year, Sweden will host the UN Stockholm Plus 50 conference to help accelerate the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals of the 2030 Agenda. This is happening at the background of UN's first ever conference on human environment that was held in Stockholm 50 years ago. When Olof Palme welcomed the world's leaders to that conference, he observed, with words that are relevant today, as relevant as they were then, "Our future is common. We must share it together. We must shape it together." Mr. Speaker, the general welfare system as a whole will be strengthened. It is the greatest redistributive power that we have. That is why it must not fall short. But if there is one thing that the pandemic laid bare, it is that the welfare system has its shortcomings. The Swedish welfare system is borne up by its workers. They need more colleagues, the right training, and better working environments. This is a major undertaking, but it is not impossible. Important steps have been taken. The government has successively provided more money to municipalities and regions in recent years. Today, and compared to 100,000 more people work in welfare system than in 2014. But now also the children from the 90s are now entering education, when many of the people in the 1940s are entering their 80s and should receive the secure care they deserve. For this reason, the general central government funding will be increased further. Cancer care, psychiatric care, maternity care and emergency service care will be prioritised as healthcare is expanded. Waiting lists will be shortened, healthcare centres strengthened, and continuity of care in general practice will be ensured for more people. The work on a new legislation for care of older people to boost quality and equality in care will continue. The right of all home help service users to a dedicated contact person will be established in law. Those who work in care for older people will have the opportunity to study on a paid work time to become an assistant nurse, and a recovery bonus has been introduced to allow for better working conditions. The work for secure pensions is about respect for those who have helped to build our country. Pensions have been increased for those who have had a long working life with low pay. The housing supplement will be further increased. A structural reform to strengthen the incomes of those with disadvantaged pensioners in the long term will be presented. This will mean up to 1,000 kronor more each month. A security pension will be introduced so that people over 60 who are physically worn out will not have to take out their old age pension prematurely. Pensions need to be raised further. For this reason, payments into the pension system must increase. An initiative to this will be laid before the Working Group on Pensions. And when you need society most, a strong society should be there for you. The government has already eliminated the permanent gap between pensioners and wage earners. Taxes are now also being lowered substantially for people receiving sickness and activity compensation. The direction is clear. The tax gap between those with disabilities and wage earners is unjust. The guaranteed benefit in sickness and activity compensation will increase. The government will continue to strengthen the right to personal assistance. Those who become ill should have support to quickly return to work. A comprehensive investment is being made to increase financial security in case of illness. The sickness benefit ceiling is being raised. Proposals from the sickness insurance inquiry will be implemented to allow more time for rehabilitation and increased flexibility for older people, on-demand employees and those on part-time sick leave. And municipal schools, they assume greater overall responsibility than independent schools, and then they should also have adequate resources for this. Tax revenue intended for schools, well, those should go to schools. School admissions must be fair, providing equal opportunities and equal possibilities. Reform by reform, step by step, the welfare system can be made stronger and more equitable now and in the future. Likewise, it can be dismantled step by step, reform by reform. It is political will that decides. It is possible to take back democratic control over the welfare system. Let us do so. Mr. Speaker, when the pandemic hit our country, we came together across party lines to protect our people and Swedish jobs. I would like to thank the Riksdag parties that have engaged in constructive and solution-oriented cooperation with the government during this electoral period, not least the Centre Party and the Liberal Party for their cooperation on economic policy. But the pandemic is not over. Global and equitable access to vaccines must be secured. New mutations of the virus are a worrying development. The trend is negative in a number of countries in Europe and around the world. Infection rates are beginning to increase even in Sweden. The government is preparing for a worsening of the situation. The single most important thing now is that vaccination is continued apace. Everyone over the age of 18 will be offered a third dose. Now we must reach the groups with low vaccination rates, and there are major variations between regions. And the methods that work best to reach as many people as possible must be spread. And I want to urge the regions to learn from each other. And I want to urge everyone in Sweden to get vaccinated. We do it for our own sakes, but also for each other. Sweden must be well prepared. The Pandemic Act has been extended and the government is prepared to take the necessary measures in the fight against the virus and will soon present a new action plan. Further measures to maintain safe distances in public places will be necessary, and vaccination certificates will be required for certain indoor public gatherings and events will be with more than 100 people and will be necessary as of December the 1st, and a consultation on the proposal to require vaccination certificates in restaurants and gyms will take place shortly. The communicable diseases legislation will be reviewed so that a new legislation is in place ahead of future pandemics, and new crisis legislation will be investigated. I will also make organisational changes in the government offices. The Crisis Management Coordination Secretariat, which was previously at the Ministry of Justice, will move to the Prime Minister's office. Thanks to responsible fiscal policy, Sweden went into the pandemic with its lowest national debt since 1977. The employment rate is now back to the same level as prior to the pandemic. And although Sweden has invested hundreds of billions of krona in crisis measures to save jobs and businesses during the pandemic, our public finances are still strong. So strong, in fact, that it is motivated to shift from a surplus target to a balanced target. Culture will play a key role in society's restart. Culture takes us outside ourselves and brings us also closer to each other. A free and independent cultural sector is fundamental for every successful democratic society. And support is also being given to theatres, museums, visual arts and design, film libraries, and orchestras and dance groups throughout the country. These will be all being reinforced. And in the whole country, we're also going to have more medias and a strong public service. The rapid technological media developments are revolutionizing access to information, but also risk increasing disparities and polarization in society. The budgetary appropriations for sport will substantially increase so as to boost participation primarily among children and young people and people with disabilities. Our national minorities' cultures and language rights will be reinforced, and the legal protection against discrimination will be enhanced. Early next year, the Human Rights Institute in Lund will be established to promote and defend human rights at a national level. Racism, hate crime and intolerance will have no place. Racism, hate crime and intolerance will have no place in Sweden. Activities that counteract or prevent racism will receive increased support. In March, Sweden will resume the presidency of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, and the Sweden's Holocaust Museum will open next summer. Mr. Speaker, Swedish foreign policy will safeguard Sweden's self-determination, Sweden's democracy and the security of the Swedish people. Promoting peace and development is in Sweden's immediate interests and benefits the rest of the world. It is therefore in Sweden's interest to encourage collaboration and dialogue between countries and stand up for an international legal order. 4 areas will be particularly emphasized. Firstly, cooperation must be strengthened in our immediate neighbourhood, in the Nordic region and the EU, and that various kinds of borders keeping the peoples of the Nordic region apart is in our history an alien phenomenon. Free movement between the Nordic countries needs to be reinstated as soon as possible. Nordic cooperation is being deepened and broadened, with particular emphasis on joint crisis response. And the Nordic and Baltic countries should lead the way in Europe and together be one of the world's most integrated, sustainable and digitalized regions. And European cooperation is crucial for Sweden. It's about jobs. Since the EU is our most important market, it's about peace and security, both in our neighbourhood and further afield. But that's not all. The climate, migration, vaccines, and fighting cross-border and organised crime, all of these can be handled better in cooperation with others. The EU is built on common values. EU member states that do not respect human rights and democratic principles, such as independent courts, academic freedom and media freedom, should not receive EU funds unconditionally. I want to see a more open and more equal Europe with better working conditions and greater gender equalities. But the Swedish labour market model and our forestry must not be subject to exhaustive rules from Brussels. Secondly, Sweden's security policy remains firmly in place. The military alliance freedom serves our country well and contributes to stability and security in Northern Europe. Sweden will not apply for membership in NATO. Sweden will not take a passive stance if a catastrophe or disaster attacks us or another Nordic country or an EU country, and we expect that these countries to act in the same way if Sweden is affected. The EU is Sweden's most important foreign and security policy arena. Our ongoing term as chair of the OSCE gives Sweden an opportunity to safeguard the European security order. Sweden and the EU condemn Russia's military aggression towards Ukraine and including its illegal annexation of Crimea. Situation for the people who are stuck at the border between Poland and Belarus is unacceptable. Belarus's actions will be met with increased sanctions. Thirdly, Sweden's security and development are best secured together with others. The greatest challenges of our time, the climate, the pandemic, safeguarding democracy, are best tackled through multilateral cooperation based on international law and the United Nations Charter. And it is a welcome development that the United States is once again a constructive partner on these issues. The transatlantic relationship is essential to the security and prosperity of Sweden and Europe. The conflicts of today demand the engagement of the rest of the world. Lasting peace between Israel and Palestine requires a two-state solution. And intractable conflicts continue to afflict the peoples of Afghanistan, Ethiopia, Yemen, and Mali. Alleviating the humanitarian consequences of war and resolving conflicts in the long term requires regional and international cooperation. Our development assistance must prevent and address climate change to a greater extent. The focus on democracy and development cooperation will continue, as will efforts to strengthen women's and girls' rights. In addition, additional 70 million people are living in extreme poverty during the pandemic. The Swedish official development assistance will be the equivalent of 1% of gross national income. Fourthly, Sweden must be equipped to meet the major geopolitical, technological and economic shifts of our time. Society's capacity to manage crises must be strong, in peacetime as in wartime. Sweden is deepening its defence cooperation with Finland and other Nordic neighbours, within the EU, with the United States and in partnership with NATO. Our national defence is being expanded. 5 regiments and an Air Force wing are currently being re-established in Falun, Sollefteå, Östersund, Arvidsjaur, Kristinehamn, Gothenburg and Uppsala. Civil defence is being strengthened. A new, updated national security strategy is being developed. Sweden remains a strong voice for nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. China's growing role represents another of the great global changes of our time. Sweden and the EU will pursue an active policy in relation to China based on our interests and our values. New migration legislation has entered into force in Sweden. It is well balanced, with a view to assuring that Swedish migration policy is sustainable in the long term and provides a humane, legally certain and effective regulatory framework that is not materially different from migration policies in other EU member states. Mr. Speaker, honourable members of the Riksdag, I began by speaking about Swedish democracy and 100 years of universal and equal suffrage. And democracy, that is who we are. We who live in Sweden, we who work here, we who are raising the next generations. We must keep this in mind when we encounter each other in our day-to-day lives. I want us to meet and treat each other with respect. It is we, all of us, together who bear Sweden up. Or perhaps so in a healthcare centre, syringes at the ready, and giving people vaccinations. Perhaps we're trying to think of funny rhymes and while looking for hats and gloves in the preschool cloakroom now that it's getting cold. Perhaps it's quite hectic at the garage we're working at because people have a tendency to try to change their winter tyres at the last minute. We are all together in contributing to the Sweden we love. And there are many of us doing our bit for democracy. In our coffee break, when booking a slot in the communal laundry room, on the construction site, often without even thinking about it. When we speak out, when we demand respect for ourselves, for our colleagues, or for an unknown fellow human being who is being treated unfairly. In trusting others that are doing the same for us, we shall not have a Sweden in which one group looks down on another. The introduction of universal suffrage in 1921 was not the end of our democracy building, it was the starting point. And the fight for democracy, for human dignity and respect, for every person's power to influence their day-to-day lives and our common society, that never ends. We will take this fight with us in what remains of this parliamentary session as we take forceful action against crime, surge ahead in the climate transition and take back control of the welfare system. We will all take this fight into the election campaign next year and further onward into the coming decades. Everyone has a responsibility and everyone's efforts are needed. The Sweden that we build together with respect for each other is a stronger Sweden.
Herr talman.
Mr. Speaker, let me now, by way of conclusion, provide the names of the ministers who will join the government with me. Ministers at the Prime Minister's office, Hans Dahlgren. Minister and head of the Ministry for Justice, Morgan Johansson. Also, Anders Ygeman in that ministry. Ministry and head of the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, Ann Linde. Ministry also has Anna Hallberg and Matilda Sartkrantz as ministers. Minister and head of the Ministry of Defense, Peter Hultqvist. Minister and head of the Ministry for Health and Social Affairs, Lena Hallengren. Minister also Ardalan Shekarabi in that ministry. Minister and head of the Ministry for Finance, Mikael Damberg. Minister in the Ministry for Finance, also Max Elge and Ida Karkiainen. Minister and head of the Ministry for Education, Anna Ekström. Minister in the Ministry for Education, also Lina Axelsson Kihlbom. Minister and head of the Ministry of Environment, Annika Strandhäll. Minister and head of the Ministry for Business, Industry and Innovation, Karl Petter Thorvaldsson. Minister in the same ministry, furthermore, Anna-Karin Zetterberg. Minister and head of the Ministry of Culture, Jeanette Gustavsdotter. Minister and head of the Ministry for Labour, Eva Nordmark. Minister and responsible minister also, Johan Anielsson. Minister and head of the Infrastructure Ministry, Thomas Eneroth. Minister in the same department, Kashayar Farmanval. In the traditional manner, the Riksdag will receive all the detailed information on the changes to the various ministries. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Vi tackar statsministern för regeringsförklaringen och anmälan om utsedda statsråd.
Thank you to the Prime Minister for that statement of government policy and the information on the ministers composing the new government.
Godkänner kammaren protokoll från sammanträdet tisdagen den 9 november? Svaret är ja. Punkt 4-14, ärenden för hänvisning till utskott. Motioner hänvisas till utskott enligt förslag på föredragningslistan. Punkt 15-22, ärenden för bordläggning. Ärenden på föredragningslistan anmäls till bordläggning. Därmed är samtliga ärenden på dagens föredragningslista behandlade. Kammaren övergår till anmälan av dokument med mera som har inkommit under dagen. Till bordläggning anmäls till kammaren överlämnad proposition 65. Till bordläggning anmäls motioner avlämnade med anledning av skrivelse 43. Till bordläggning anmäls från utrikesutskottet inkommet betänkande UU1. Jag får anmäla att en fråga inte kommer att besvaras. Behagade kammarens ledamöter åtskiljas? Svaret är ja.